The other piece of homework that I gave my students in the Lunar Jacket workshop this week was to prep their ties at home. In the instructions, it will ask you to take your tie piece and fold it right sides together, stitch, trim the seam allowance, and then turn it right sides out. I think that's called the tubing method. You can Google it to see what that's all about. I actually don't like that method because I find it really hard to get the safety pins through, and it gets all bunched up and it gets very tight and frustrating. And my preferred method, which I would like to share with you today, is the following. So it's always a matter of personal preference and choice. It's completely up to you, but I would choose to prepare my ties like this. So this is right side, this is the wrong side. So I would start by ironing my tie piece wrong sides together, and then you would take these edges and fold them into that center crease and iron again to create a strip like that, and then you would fold that on itself and iron again. And then what you would need to do is trim the corners to reduce bulk. And you're going to fold those short edges in as well. So it's a few steps, the process, but I find it gives me greater control and has a neater result. Well, maybe equally neat, but definitely easier for me to do. But again, it's completely up to you. As with everything in sewing, there's no one way of doing something. People have their preferred ways of doing it, so it's up to you to have a little play and experiment and see what speaks to you. So this is how I would prep my front ties. I think the key is to take time when you're pressing it to get things looking nice and even. And then once you're happy, you can pin everything in place and take it over to your machine. And then you would stitch along the short edge, along that long edge, and then again along the short edge. If the end is looking like that, as in it's not neat, you can always just take a pin. If there's a few little loose threads sticking out, you can just take your pin and kind of tuck them in gently and use your pin as a little tool to help you to just kind of minimally shift this fabric inside that fold and sort of out of view so that it has a neater, oh sorry, I just went off camera, so that it has a neater looking finish. When it comes to edge stitching, so stitching really close to an edge, there's a few ways you can go about it. You can just eyeball it, or you can choose to align that center line with the edge of your fabric and then just shift the needle position over by a couple of millimeters, and that way you're, oops, sorry, my phone just ran out of battery. It helps to have your needle lowered so that you can lift your presser foot and see where you are. So you want to start as close to the corner as possible, fairly close to the edge, a couple of millimeters away. The problem with that is that sometimes your fabric will get sucked into the machine because there's not much for it to kind of grab onto. So I always like to hold my thread tails. You should have your two threads, your top thread and your bobbin thread. And I just like to gently tug as I begin to sew. I'm gently pulling with those threads towards the back. Otherwise they have a tendency to kind of get sucked into the machine and make like a messy tangle. So just keep a hold of those tails. You don't want to be pulling them, but you just want to keep it gently taut. And then do a back stitch and sew up until the corner. When you get close to the corner, just slow down and stop and lift up your presser foot to see where you're at. If you wanted to get like a tiny bit closer to the edge here, but you are scared you're gonna sew beyond that edge, then you can always just turn your hand wheel at the side of the machine and then just keep checking where you're at. So that looks pretty good to me. You always want to make sure that your needle's in the down position so that you can pivot cleanly like that. Otherwise you're going to run into trouble with that sort of slipping away. So with the needle in the down position, pivot and then line yourself up, and then you can lower that presser foot again. And then just continue to sew down the long edge. When you come to the other end and you're trying to get closer to the edge without going beyond that edge, just use your hand wheel to get into a good position. Keep your needle down, pivot, and then finish sewing that final short edge, remembering to backstitch at the end.